Natural history is a complex and wonderful thing, and the further back you go, the weirder and more impressive it becomes. Part of the magic that the distant past holds for us, the reason that it continues to captivate the imagination and stimulate interest, is the inevitable mystery that surrounds so much of it. Even the work done to help unveil the long and intricate history of the world around us can be confusing or misunderstood. What exactly is paleontology? How is it done? How does it overlap with other sciences such as archaeology and geology? And what's the point of it anyway, if there's billions of years between ourselves and these bygone eras? Natural history is the study of the natural world, living or once living organisms, fungi, flora, fauna, and their environments. Early natural history, or the beginnings of any kind of paleo study, builds upon this core area of focus and applies to the beginning of the Holocene epoch and earlier. The Holocene epoch is our current geological time period and sets the tone for how we discuss the segments of our ancient history, which is simply too immense to comprehend without breaking it into more manageable frames of thought. These categories are defined by different environmental or geological events and vary in duration at every level across the entire system. So while the Mesozoic and Cenozoic eras both contain three separate periods, Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous in the former, and Paleogene, Neogene, and Quaternary for the latter, the length of each is distinct. The most famous period, by name at least, is the Jurassic, and spans 56 million years. The equivalent, in our current Cenozoic era, the Neogene, lasted a paltry 20 million years in comparison. The segments of time on a geological scale are broken down from eon into era, into period, into epoch, and then into age. The eon in which the first single-cellular forms of life began is known as the Archean, and started 40 billion years ago. For context, the early Holocene, that marker from which we work backwards for all our paleontological studies, starts 11,700 years ago. It is this geological timescale that provides a framework, a sense of context and relation, for all the pieces of the great puzzle that is the Earth's unbelievably long history. Paleontology is a fairly broad term, now we know we are in effect discussing almost the entirety of that history, and naturally it is itself separated into smaller, more specialized disciplines. The main separations are vertebrate or backboned versus invertebrate paleontology for the study of animal life, paleobotany and micropaleontology for the study of plant life and things like pollen, algae, and protists, and further breaks down into fields like paleoecology and paleoclimatology. Much like historians of humanities, specialists in these areas will tend to focus in on a narrowed band of time relevant to a certain element of their research. Although paleontology is now a clear and definable area of study, it has enjoyed an interesting development over human history as our understanding and interpretation of the past, of fossil discoveries, and our relationship with the environment have changed. Oftentimes, some of the earliest actors in the development of natural science were collectors or scholars across multiple areas of interest, looking at human history and natural history together. Without the understanding of the sheer scope of time that our planet has been in existence, it was not uncommon for people interested in the past to collect both human and pre-human samples together. The term fossil initially encompassed all earthly curios, minerals, bones, strange-shaped rocks, and Stone Age tools. It was later that the areas of study began to be considered different, although not unrelated fields. In particular, archaeology and paleontology share a special and often fairly romanticized relationship in the public mind. The physical practice of both fields is broadly similar. Both involve careful excavations of old and precious artifacts or samples, using the same kinds of tools and processes. Both then employ careful and complex systems of preservation on these objects, follow conventions of display, labeling, and storage. Both will intersect with the other sciences to help produce a better understanding of the subject material, such as in the application of carbon dating. However, the key difference between the two is the human element. Archaeology, at its core, is an investigation into the human experience across history, while paleontology reaches beyond that, to recover the world that existed long before humans and potentially apply that knowledge to a human future. Some of the earliest paleontological work done was by the classical Greek scholar Xenophanes, who lived 570 to 480 BCE, who recognized that fossils are the remains of bygone creatures, suggesting that the land was formerly underwater and therefore subject to dramatic change. Discoveries in classical times don't mean that the understanding of our environmental history or paleontological progress was linear, however, and the nature of life and its origins has seen many diverse theories across the centuries, many of which were incorrect and have since been rejected or forgotten. There were times when backward steps were taken, times when ideas were formed and moulded around firmly held beliefs or religious ideology. For centuries in Europe, there was a collective effort to fit in some way with the biblical story of Noah and the Great Flood. The study of fossils in the distant past was by no means isolated to Europe alone. China, a bountiful source of incredibly diverse and important fossils, particularly of Jurassic and Cretaceous dinosaurs, has its own valuable scientific history. Shen Guo, sometimes Meng Shi Wang, was an important 9th century scholar of the Song dynasty. In addition to an impressive list of accomplishments in astronomy, statecraft, and archaeology, he formulated a hypothesis about the process of land formation, or what has become geomorphology. This is the study of how elements like air, ice, and water may manipulate the landscape over time. He arrived at the conclusion through observation of fossilized marine shells in the Taihang Mountains in China's north, a place far removed from the ocean, and deduced that not only was the environment different at some point, but that it had left a physical impact on the landscape. Another notable achievement of his, in one of the earliest examples of paleoclimatology, he looked at petrified bamboo samples uncovered by a landslide in 1080, in a region incapable of growing the plant, and he inferred that the climate of the region must have undergone substantial change since ancient times. Finding fossils and deducing information from them did not always belong to a formalized area of study, and in the beginning, even naturalists looking at contemporary specimens struggled with a lack of standardized approach. Carl von Linn, more commonly known as Linnaeus, produced the first collection of works to consistently employ binary nomenclature or the combination of generic and scientific names. This was adopted into broader biology and zoology as a method of clear and coherent classification of an increasingly complex inventory based on morphologic similarity. While he was not responsible for any great scientific discoveries or ideas, the benefit of a clear standard to operate within cannot be underrated, although the system has seen its own developments and refinements over time. Although precious, not all fossils inspired the same discussion and interest, with early naturalists often overlooking or devaluing vegetative fossils. It was comparatively quite recently that they were determined to be distinct from modern flora and given closer scrutiny. In 1718, Antoine de Jussieu became one of the first botanists to note these differences, concluding that Carboniferous specimens had been brought to France from elsewhere. A century later, there were multiple efforts to integrate fossils into the modern flora system of classification, setting down the foundation for systematic paleobotany. Development of the sciences began to accelerate from this point, with better access to education and a wider range of existing hypotheses and schools of thought. In 1830, geologist Sir Charles Lyell released his Principles of Geology, transferring geological time into a clear and understandable account of the slow development of the Earth. Around the same time, Edward Forbes helped foster ecology, or the study of organisms and their relationships to their environments. Paleoecology emerged slowly, restricted by the accompanying complexities and difficulty in being able to observe the environments or life forms in question, particularly marine. It goes without saying that one of the biggest problems with paleontology is the scarcity of material. These rare fossil samples also have a more complex relationship to the population in question and are distributed across a larger period of time than, for example, archaeological specimens. There is no escaping the fact that few organisms will make it through a fossilization process, and the condition in which those that do varies in usefulness and type. We are more likely to see fossils of organisms from aquatic environments, especially marine, due in part to the requisite deposit of other materials to intervene before the decomposition process can be complete, or other environmental effects destroy the evidence. In addition to the type of material in which the organism is embedded, the structure and composition of a given life form will also have an effect on its durability into a fossil. For example, chitin, a hard, fibrous substance found in many insect exoskeletons and fungi, breaks down less easily than softer body parts formed from things like silicates. It is also consistent across all types of fossils and all types of organisms that the softer parts of a being are less likely to endure. Bones, claw, and shells are much more likely to survive through the ages to be rediscovered by humans than the delicate tissue of flesh, muscle, or cartilage. Fossilization also occurs in different ways, and we can recognize 6 main types of fossil. First, preservation of the entire organism. Examples of this type include woolly mammoth or rhino found in the frozen mud and ice of Siberia, and insects encased in amber. It is important to note that the preservation of the soft parts is still exceedingly rare in these amber samples. A recent example of this type is the Siberian puppy uncovered in 2019 that had died some 18,000 years ago. It was remarkably well preserved, with not just its fur intact, but also whiskers, eyelashes, and milk teeth, and generated a lot of interest about the divergence of dogs and wolves. To draw an archaeological parallel, a similar process is seen with the preservation of human bodies in peat bogs, such as those found in Ireland, although these are necessarily much younger. Second, an almost unchanged skeleton. The soft parts of these organisms is completely lost, but the skeleton remains almost the same, but without its original organic material. This can be seen in some shells or marine creatures and are nearly indistinguishable from their modern counterparts, except for being porous, colourless, and perhaps a little lighter. In some cases, some mineral substitution may occur, making the skeleton heavier and more compact. Third, carbonization. In this process, which is similar to the conversion of vegetation into coal, the original material decomposes, losing oxygen and nitrogen. The relative percentage of carbon is therefore increased. Fourth, petrification. Petrification, turned to stone. Many early accounts of paleospecimens, including Shanguao's bamboo samples, are described as having been turned to stone, and can be very detailed. In this process, the fossil may show the minute structure and form, but the original material has, over time, been replaced by another mineral. For example, petrified wood samples may show the cells and vessels as a living tree would, but those walls are now formed out of silica instead of cellulose. Fifth, molds. Sometimes the skeleton will entirely dissolve, but leave behind a mold in the sediment in which it was buried, producing a pocket or void. If we fill this space with wax, for example, it will provide a perfect replica, of the outside at least, of the original. Sometimes this mold will be filled naturally as a new mixture of mineral matter is deposited inside the cavity, resulting in something that may at first be mistaken for a fossil in its own right. Mold-making processes are very important generally in sharing and studying fossils across different institutions and methods. Sixth, trace fossils or imprints. Trace fossils aren't directly part of what was once a living creature, but rather evidence of their impact in the world. These include tracks or claw marks, and are still regarded as fossils, as they can be very important, especially where the other kinds of physical evidence are lacking. For example, on the Dampier Peninsula in Western Australia, there are many dinosaur trackways on the coastal sandstone, including the only sauropod tracks found in Australia. There have been no vertebrate body fossils found, however, which leave these tracks as the only proof that we once had sauropod populations at all. The locations that these fossils are found, their placement within each group of stratified rock or system, is critical in understanding the fossil and its value in a broader picture. Removing these fossils without properly identifying the environment they were discovered in seriously reduces their scientific value. Without the context of that environment, they become hard to identify, harder to verify, and importantly, harder to relate back to the larger body of knowledge on the subject. There are times, usually for the sake of profit, where some specimens will be removed from that context and sold on. After all, who wouldn't want to own a dinosaur skull or the first of a new species? But aside from the sentimental value, they have become almost worthless, as their capacity to help inform and be informed by the wider literature has been removed. For all its interesting history, what good is paleontology for us in the present? Much of the focus of contemporary paleontology research surrounds the diversity and distribution of extinct life forms, and increasingly, the study of entire communities of extinct organisms. This helps enable an interconnected approach to understanding the ecosystems in which certain organisms lived and the conditions under which they were preserved. New discoveries and information, when integrated with the existing data, help to improve and develop our understanding of both the past and the evolutionary processes that led to current or extant life forms. The comprehensive picture of these organisms, their origins and long-term trends, can only be fully appreciated with a time-rich paleontological perspective. In short, the better our understanding of the past and its changes, the better our understanding of the present. The more useful the context. Not only can patterns of the past, documented by the fossil record, shed light on the history of the Earth, but it may also offer insights into potential outcomes of major environmental changes in the future, an area of inquiry that is particularly relevant in a time of rising concern about the impact of human-driven environmental change. While there is a general consensus among researchers that climate change profoundly affects biological systems, the way individual species and ecosystems may respond to such changes is less well understood, an area in which paleontological research may prove to have significant input. One such example is paleoclimatic modelling, which has been particularly helpful in showing that our planet's climate system can change dramatically in a matter of years or decades. Put simply, this involves looking at the present environmental information applied to timeframes and rates of change in the past geological data, to evaluate possible future responses of the environment to climate change, and potentially highlight what kinds of change are directly attributable to human impact. This kind of modelling is another example of the interdisciplinary nature of natural history, drawing on geological, biological, and chemical data. It is paleoclimatology, for example, using the records of tree rings and lake sediment from North America, that show severe decadal scale droughts occurring over the last 1,000 years, lasting much longer than any in our instrumentally recorded history. Gaining an insight into past environmental crises gives us the opportunity to apply that knowledge to a possible future, and give us a better chance at overcoming challenges that may lie ahead. The National Dinosaur Museum hopes you've enjoyed this episode of Echoes from the Eons, supported by the ACT Government through the Where You Are Festival 2020, produced by Events ACT. Check out our website or follow us on Facebook for more great content, or better yet, come visit us at the museum.